Welcome. I can never say Anthropocene. Anthropocene.
That is the song of the kawaii bird, the last male of the species calling for a partner who'll never come. That is what extinction sounds like. It also sounds like the revving of a chainsaw, the thump of a harpoon, and the whistling of a bullet. Extinction looks like miles of raised rainforest and oceans with more plastic than fish. It smells like car diesel and pollution, and it feels like hopelessness, like the end of beauty and wonder. In this room, some of you were born in the Holocene, the name given to the 12,000-year period of climatic stability that allowed humans to settle, farm, and create civilizations. The rest of us were born in the Anthropocene, the name given to the last several decades where we have upturned everything. At about 7, before I knew what the word Anthropocene was, or I had heard of carbon dioxide or extinction or deforestation, I remember working for weeks with my dad on my reading, poring over a book about Charles Darwin and his adventures on the Beagle. To someone so small, and I'm sure for all of you at that age, the world seems like an endless scope of possibility to be discovered. I wanted to be an explorer, as many children do, imagining, also as many children do, all that there was out there to be known. The species that must be out there in the canopies of remote rainforests, hidden in the crevices of vast coral reefs, and deep ocean species that hadn't been seen by the human eye. I didn't realize at the time I was dreaming of the Holocene, but living in the Anthropocene. When I was old enough to understand this, I gave a speech on a street corner, truly believing, maybe a bit naive in hindsight, that I would do that event and need to do nothing more. That somehow, miraculously, the power of us coming together and standing in Parliament Square would be enough. I asked the crowd to imagine the poisoned chalice they'd be handing their children. The question then was whether we could protect our children from the impacts of the climate crisis. Now the question has become, are we going to be able to protect ourselves? The question then was which species might go extinct, and the question now is which species won't. Picture 1.4 to 4.4 degrees hotter than pre-industrial levels by the end of this century. That was the IPCC's latest report about possible temperature rise. Now picture Belinda Riccomani, a young woman I spoke to via Zoom in 2020 for my book, Children of the Anthropocene. She's 17 years old and living on the Solomon Islands, watching in despair as Wallundi Island, which she's always been able to see from her bedroom window, is drained of life, as day by day, the ocean gnaws further inland. Since 2002, the 1,200 inhabitants of Wallundi Island have abandoned their homes. Only one house remains. It belongs to a man called Timothy, who lives there with his grandchildren. The other villagers have all moved away from the island, and when they're asked about Timothy's motives, they say, "He's stubborn, he won't listen to us." Every morning, his 4 young grandchildren take the canoe to the mainland where they go to school, and Timothy spends a day adding rocks to the wall around his house, trying to hold off the water for just a little bit longer. If I move to the mainland, I can't see anything through the trees. I won't even see the water. I want to have this spot where I can look around me because I'm part of this place, he says. That loneliness, that loss conveyed through a story like Belinda's and Timothy's, that's only at 1.1 degrees of anthropogenic warming. At 1.1 degrees, we have deadly storms of increasing intensity. Species going extinct at 1,000 times the background extinction rate. A predicted 1 billion climate refugees by 2050. More predicted global pandemics and uncontrollable wildfires. And yet we still see infinite production and economic growth in a finite system as progress, whilst we see infinite growth in a human body as cancer. But this supposed progress means that there's scarcely an Earth system that is not now threatened with collapse. None of our art, our plans, our expectations, or our hopes can survive the loss of a habitable planet. But this precipice that we sit on doesn't look out onto a landscape of just sacrifice, but also one of creativity and innovation, where children can play in the streets without fear of air pollution, where urban parks are brimming with life and not sterile stretches of grass, where business as usual is thrown out of the window and brave voices in politics and business and on the streets are willing to stand up and speak out. The power has to belong to those who see forests as complex ecosystems, not merely timber, who see the oceans as life support systems, not landfill sites, and who see wildlife as individuals, not capital to exploit and benefit from. So many of these solutions exist already. I'm going to take you on a quick whistle-stop tour of some of these lessons I learned from my documentary filmmaking in 2019 and 2020, just before the lockdown. And this was for a film called Animal, about the sixth mass extinction crisis, and for children of the Anthropocene. So in 2019, I met Afroz Shah in Mumbai, India, and he said, "Being a lawyer, your first instinct is usually to go and complain. That would have been an easy journey for me, but the responsibility was mine. I started to look at how I had helped to destroy the oceans and how I could rectify that. So I started cleaning." In 2015, in the first week of October, Afroz walked down to the beach armed with a pair of gloves and some bags. He picked up 5 bags of plastic. Within the first 3 years, he had gathered a community and picked up more than 5 million kilograms of rubbish. Then in 2018, something happened on this beach, Versova Beach, which hadn't happened in over 2 decades. The hatching of almost 80 olive Ridley turtles on the beach. A small moment, but symbolic of so much more. So the lesson I think we can learn from him, there's this cliche saying that you're never too small to make a difference, and I think you are too small to make a difference, but we all need to be that first wave that ripples out and bring others with us, because it's when we have community and communication that change happens. So the next person I talked to was Lisa Matunki, who I spoke to in 2020 via Zoom as well, when he was in the Kenyan village that he grew up in. At age 7, he formed Trees for Goals, planting trees for every goal he scored and getting others involved. He was soon invited to the UN Youth Climate Summit in New York. At 15 years old, he was one of the youngest at the conference and was determined to do even more after meeting other young people taking action. When he returned to Kenya, he was invited to meet Kenya's president and plant trees with him. As we were ending our call, I asked Layson about his hopes for the future. He said, "I hope we can get football teams all around the world, including FIFA, to adopt this approach. After all, the climate crisis is a universal crisis, and football is a universal game." What did I learn from him? That we must all find joy in making change. Very few people do activism or change-making because they enjoy it, but rather because they feel some inexplicable desire to have an impact, to make things just a little bit better in any way that they can or know possible. But in order to sustain and actually enjoy what you're doing, incorporate yourself and your passions into the process. Personalize it by playing to your strengths. It's only when everyone has a role that the movement will become as widespread as possible. Change must be driven by passion, not just fear or resentment. It's so much easier to convince others when you're actually excited about what you're doing. That is grainy, isn't it? I spoke to Harvey and Tom Tweets in 2019, both of them 18 at the time, and they had acquired a license and began to breed reptiles on a strip of land in their home with the aim of rewilding them. Both of them were doing their A-levels at the time, and Harvey talked to me about a study conducted in America which took 10 hectares of healthy, biodiverse marshland. They counted and weighed every single amphibian, and the total weight was the same as a black rhino, which shows just how crucial the smallest species are, which we overlook massively in the UK. The lesson from Harvey and Tom, which I learned, was that conservation and environmentalism is so much about reintroducing, rewilding functionally extinct species. And this taught me that what we're moving towards is not just about sacrifices, but a world that's more ethical, more sustainable, and more livable than the one now. A world that we can't even imagine because we don't know what it could be like. Simply conserving what we have left is not enough. How exciting is that for all of us? That makes me want to do more, because we have no idea what the world could be like in 2050. But imagine something more diverse and brimming with wildlife than today. I talked at the beginning about the endless possibility I felt reading about Charles Darwin and his adventures when I was little. He was also the one who said that it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most adaptable to change. And that's what I learned from these people. It wasn't the power or the strength or the wisdom that made the greatest change makers I met, but rather those who were adaptable. They saw a problem, rolled up their sleeves, and got to work doing what they could with the resources that they had. All of us are fundamentally changing the nature of nature. But human nature is blessed with the capacity of knowing what happened in our history before we were born, what will happen if we continue on the trajectory we're on, and most of all, the power of knowing how dependent we are on the planet, and how we cannot, in any circumstances, survive the collapse of the ecosystems which are balancing on the precipice, meaning that we must change. All the knowledge that we need to survive already exists. We are just like babies at the bottom of the stairs, afraid to take the first steps. We are stuck in archaic cycles and metrics. David Attenborough said that anyone who believes in infinite growth on a finite planet is either mad or an economist. But now, some brilliantly mad economists are coming up with new ways for our species to live on this planet. We measure societal success on GDP, economic growth. But what if we change from those linear, degenerative economies to something circular and regenerative? What if we reuse the technologies we have in a circular design that actually serves us rather than endangering us? What if, we, us, lots of hypotheticals, lots of us's and we's. Whilst we cannot have action without a dialogue, and we need shared spaces like this to imagine and to plan, this isn't an intangible kind of hope that I'm telling you to find, but one that every one of us must create for ourselves through a strengthened resolve to talk louder, act more, and hold to account. In this room, we have activists, business leaders, economists, teachers, and more. I invite you to join me, no matter your position, occupation, background, Holocene or Anthropocene, baby. I want us to be able to leave with new ideas, concepts, and networks, but also with something that we can all start off, thinking of now, and please feel free to chat about this afterwards. An individual, community, and governmental action that we can each do when we leave. How exciting that all of us in this room are alive at a time when we can be part of the group who aren't overwhelmed by the problem, but who fall in love with the creativity, innovation, and possibility that the future holds. Thank you so much.